I think I hold the record for the most expensive visitor parking pass ever issued, but I can't be sure. Let me know where you're watching from and if your HOA has ever tried to pull something this crazy. I moved into this neighborhood for one reason: peace. After a 30-year career in forensic accounting, mostly untangling the deliberate financial chaos created by corporate criminals, I wanted a place where the loudest sound was the birds, and the most complex decision was whether to plant roses or hydrangeas. The house was perfect, a modest but solid brick home at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, backing onto a small, beautifully maintained park. The community, known as Willow Creek Estates, seemed like the dictionary definition of serene suburbia. The sales agent mentioned the Homeowners Association, of course, but framed it as a positive. "They're just here to protect property values," she'd said with a practiced, reassuring smile. "Mow your lawn, don't paint your house purple, the usual stuff." That sounded reasonable enough. I'd spent my life analyzing complex contracts. I figured I could handle a simple set of community bylaws. That was my first mistake. My second, and far more significant mistake, was underestimating Karen. Karen was the president of the Willow Creek Estates HOA. I first met her about a week after I moved in. She was a woman who seemed to be held together by hairspray and a simmering, low-grade rage. She had a perfectly coiffed, blonde helmet of hair that didn't move in the breeze, designer athletic wear that looked like it had never seen a bead of sweat, and eyes that constantly scanned for imperfections. She drove a pristine, white Mercedes G-Wagon that she parked, with aggressive precision, exactly centered in her driveway. She introduced herself not with a friendly, "Welcome to the neighborhood," but with a clipboard and a critique. "I'm Karen, the HOA president," she announced from my doorstep. "Your recycling bin was visible from the street this morning at 9:02 a.m. Trash collection is on Tuesdays. Bins cannot be put out before 7 p.m. on Monday evening and must be returned to your garage or behind a designated fence by 7 p.m. on Tuesday evening. You'll find this in Section 4, subsection B, paragraph 6 of the covenants." I just blinked at her. "Oh," I said. "Sorry, I'm still unpacking." "I'll be sure to remember that." She gave a curt nod, made a note on her clipboard, and marched away, her pristine white sneakers silent on the sidewalk. That was my introduction to the woman who would become my personal suburban nemesis. Over the next few months, I learned that Karen ran the HOA not as a community organization, but as her personal fiefdom. The Architectural Review Committee was just her. The Landscaping Committee was also her. The monthly newsletters were filled with passive-aggressive reminders and thinly veiled threats, often citing violations that seemed to target specific residents. The Andersons, 2 doors down, were fined $200 because their son's basketball hoop was allegedly an inch too close to the sidewalk. The Garcias, across the street, received a formal warning because the stain on their back deck was, in Karen's expert opinion, a non-conforming shade of cedar. I kept my head down. My lawn was immaculate. My recycling bin became a model of punctuality. I was a ghost, a perfect, rule-abiding resident. I wanted peace, and I was willing to pay for it with meticulous compliance. But my peace was conditional, entirely dependent on Karen's capricious whims. I didn't know it yet, but my quiet retirement was on a collision course with her tyrannical reign, and the catalyst was going to be my own daughter. The person I was most proud of in the world, the one person whose visit I looked forward to more than anything, was about to unwittingly ignite a war. A war Karen was legally, financially, and karmically unprepared to fight. My daughter, Amelia, is my greatest accomplishment. She's sharp, empathetic, and has a sense of justice so profound that she made it her career. While I was crunching numbers to put criminals behind bars, she was studying law to uphold the principles they'd violated. We're close, talking almost every day, but because of her demanding job, we hadn't seen each other in person for almost a year. When she called to say she had a full week off and wanted to spend it with me in my new house, I was ecstatic. I spent a week preparing for her visit like it was a state dinner, cleaning an already clean house, stocking the pantry with her favorite foods, and planning a week of absolutely nothing but catching up, reading on the patio, and maybe tackling a jigsaw puzzle. It was going to be perfect. Amelia arrived on a sunny Monday afternoon. We hugged for a long time on the driveway. She'd driven her own car, a sensible, late-model sedan that was a far cry from Karen's G-Wagon. It was clean, unassuming, and parked perfectly legally on the street in front of my house. There were no designated visitor spots on our little cul-de-sac. The street was public, and parking was open to anyone. At least, that's what any rational person, or indeed the city municipal code, would tell you. But Karen was not a rational person. She operated on a higher, more convoluted plane of existence, governed by the sacred texts of the HOA covenants, which she interpreted with the flexible zeal of a televangelist. The first notice appeared on my door less than 24 hours after Amelia arrived. It was a crisp, white envelope tucked under my doormat. Inside, a formal violation notice, complete with a grainy, zoomed-in photo of Amelia's car. The violation cited was unauthorized long-term vehicle placement by a non-resident. The fine was $50. I chuckled, assuming it was a mistake. I walked over to Karen's house, notice in hand, ready for a simple, neighborly chat to clear things up. The door was opened by her husband, a perpetually bewildered-looking man named Bob, who seemed to fade into the beige tones of their foyer. "Is Karen around?" I asked politely. He flinched slightly at the sound of her name. She's meditating." Before I could respond, Karen's voice cut through the air from somewhere deep inside the house. "Robert, who is it?" Bob scurried away, and a moment later Karen appeared, clad in silk pajamas and a scowl. "What do you want?" she snapped. I held up the notice. "Hi, Karen. Just a quick question about this. My daughter is visiting for the week, and this is her car. I think there's been a misunderstanding." Karen looked from the notice to me, her eyes narrowing. "There is no misunderstanding. The covenants are perfectly clear. Section 7, subsection D. Unmarked, on-street parking is for temporary, daytime guest use only, not to exceed 4 hours. Overnight accommodation of guest vehicles requires a permit or use of designated overflow parking." I frowned. I read the covenants. I don't recall that clause. "And where is the overflow parking?" A smirk touched her lips. "It's clearly stated. And the overflow lot is by the community pool. The community pool was over half a mile away. The idea of my daughter having to park her car there and walk back in the dark was absurd. Karen, she's my daughter. She's staying with me in my home for a few days. This isn't a long-term arrangement." "How long is she staying?" she demanded, crossing her arms. "A week. A week is long-term in the context of a temporary visitor," she stated, as if quoting from a legal precedent. "The rule is there to prevent residents from running unofficial rental operations or having undisclosed long-term tenants, which lowers property values." This was so ludicrous, I almost laughed. "She's my daughter, not a tenant." Karen's expression was a concrete wall. "Pay the fine. Have her move the car to the overflow lot, or apply for a weekly permit. The permit application fee is $75, and I'll need a copy of her driver's license and registration for our records." She was actually enjoying this. I could see it in the cold little spark in her eyes. It wasn't about the rules. It was about the power. I looked her dead in the eye. "No," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not paying the fine. I'm not paying for a permit. And you are certainly not getting a copy of my daughter's personal information. Her car is legally parked on a public street. You are overstepping your authority." The reaction was instantaneous. Her face went from smug to thunderous. "This is a direct violation. You will be fined daily. I will have the car towed. I'll see you at the next board meeting." She slammed the door in my face. The battle lines had been drawn. For the next 4 days, a new $50 fine appeared on my door each morning. Total, $200. On the 5th day, Friday, a tow truck actually showed up. I was sitting on the patio with Amelia when we heard the distinctive beeping of a large vehicle backing up. We walked out front to see a burly man hooking Amelia's car. I marched right up to him. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" The driver, a guy who looked thoroughly unimpressed with the whole situation, grunted and pointed a greasy thumb towards Karen, who was standing on her own perfect lawn, arms crossed, phone to her ear, watching with grim satisfaction. She called it in, said it's an abandoned vehicle in violation of HOA rules. I turned to Amelia. Honey, do you mind? Amelia, who had been watching this unfold with a look of profound, lawyerly calm, simply nodded. She walked to the driver, pulled out her wallet, and presented her driver's license. Sir, I am Amelia Price. This is my vehicle. It is legally registered and insured, and it is not abandoned. I am a guest of my father, who owns that property. She then turned her head slightly to look at Karen. Towing this vehicle would constitute wrongful conversion of property, and you and your company would be liable. So would the individual who knowingly made the false report. The tow truck driver looked from Amelia's ID, to my house, to Karen standing there like a statue of suburban fury. He seemed to weigh the $50 towing fee from the HOA against the headache of a potential lawsuit. He grunted again, unhooked the car, got in his truck, and drove away without a backward glance. Karen's face was a priceless picture of apoplectic rage. Her little power play had failed, publicly. That, I soon learned, was something she could not forgive. The final notice arrived 2 weeks after Amelia had gone home. It wasn't a fine. It was a certified letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. Karen and the Willow Creek Estates HOA were suing me. They were suing me for continuous and flagrant violations of the HOA covenants, for failure to remit payment for levied fines, and for creating a hostile community environment. The suit demanded payment of the $200 in fines, plus $100 in late fees, plus $5,000 in legal fees and punitive damages. They were also petitioning the court for an injunction that would require me to submit any and all future guests for pre-approval, including providing their personal identification at least 14 days in advance of their arrival. I read the letter twice, my initial shock quickly replaced by a cold, calculating calm. This was the world I understood. She had taken this out of the realm of petty neighborhood squabbles and clipboards and moved it onto my home turf. Documentation, evidence, and legal procedure. She had just made the single biggest mistake of her tenure as HOA president. She had picked a fight with a forensic accountant whose daughter was not just any lawyer. I smiled. The game was on. And while Karen was playing checkers, I was about to set up a 3-dimensional chessboard she couldn't even see. My first call, naturally, was to Amelia. I read her the highlights from the lawsuit. I expected outrage, or at least a sigh of exasperation. Instead, there was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low, soft chuckle. "Dad," she said, her voice laced with an amusement that I found incredibly reassuring. "She has no idea who she's dealing with, does she?" I grinned. "Not a clue." "Okay," she said, her tone shifting into professional mode. "Don't respond to them directly. Don't talk to Karen. Don't talk to anyone about it. Just forward the entire package to me. Let me look up this law firm. This is special." The law firm, it turned out, was a small, 2-man operation in a strip mall on the other side of town. Their website boasted expertise in HOA law and dispute resolution, which seemed to mean they were professional bullies for hire. They were the kind of lawyers who make their money by sending threatening letters and hoping people pay up to avoid the hassle. It was a volume business, and they were counting on me to be just another intimidated homeowner. While Amelia handled the initial legal parry, I went to work. A 30-year career in forensic accounting teaches you a few things. First, people who are obsessed with control are often hiding their own chaos. Second, follow the money, because it never lies. And third, never ever underestimate the power of publicly available records. I started my little project, which I internally codenamed Operation Karen Cleanup, with a simple trip to the county records office. HOAs are nonprofit corporations, and they are required to file certain documents publicly: their articles of incorporation, their annual reports, their meeting minutes. It took me less than an hour, sipping lukewarm coffee in a dusty basement archive, to find the first thread. According to the state filings, the HOA was required to hold an annual election for board members. I had lived here for nearly a year, and no such election had taken place. I checked the filings for the previous 5 years. The same 3 names appeared on the board of directors every single time: Karen as president, her bewildered husband Bob as treasurer, and a woman named Janice, who I barely recognized, as secretary. There hadn't been an electioner, at least one that was properly recorded, in 6 years. Karen hadn't been re-elected president. She'd just stayed president. Next, I turned my attention to the money. As a homeowner, I was entitled to review the HOA's financial records. I sent a polite, formal, certified letter to the HOA, addressed to Bob, the treasurer, requesting a complete copy of the financial statements for the past 3 years, including detailed income and expense reports, bank statements, and the general ledger. The bylaws stated they had 30 days to comply. For 29 days, I heard nothing. On the 30th day, I received a thin envelope containing a 1-page summary. It was a joke. It had broad categories like landscaping, 40, 0, administrative, 15, 0, and repairs, 25, 0. It was the kind of financial statement designed to reveal nothing. This was an insult to my profession. It was also, I suspected, a cover-up. So, I sent another letter, this one a bit more pointed. I cited the specific state statutes that required nonprofit corporations to provide detailed financial records to their members upon request, not just a vague summary. I mentioned that failure to comply could result in an investigation by the State Attorney General's office. This time, I CC'd Amelia. The response was much faster. Within a week, a thick package arrived at my door. It was 3 years of bank statements, check copies, and invoices. It was disorganized, messy, and exactly what I had hoped for. Bob had clearly just photocopied everything in the filing cabinet without organizing it. He might as well have handed me a signed confession. For the next 2 nights, I didn't sleep. With a pot of black coffee and a stack of yellow legal pads, I went to work. I spread the documents across my dining room table, turning it into a command center for my one-man war. It was beautiful. It was like coming home. The patterns started to emerge almost immediately. There was the landscaping company, Pristine Lawns LLC. They were indeed paid around 40,000 a year. A quick search of state business records revealed that Pristine Lawns LLC was registered just 3 years ago. The registered agent and sole proprietor, Robert Bob Miller, Karen's husband. He was paying himself with HOA money for a service that was, by all accounts from my neighbors, subcontracted out to a couple of teenagers in a pickup truck for a fraction of the cost. Then there were the administrative fees. Dozens of checks written out to cash for office supplies, signed by Bob and countersigned by Karen. Oddly, these cash withdrawals often happened a day or 2 before Karen was spotted with a new designer handbag, or just before she and Bob left on one of their frequent weekend getaways. And my personal favorite, the legal fees. Over the past 3 years, the HOA had paid over $30,000 to the same strip mall law firm that was now suing me. They were using our dues to fund their own personal enforcement squad, suing residents for basketball hoops and deck stain. It was a self-licking ice cream cone of tyranny. But the smoking gun, the one that made me lean back in my chair and whistle, was a single, massive invoice under repairs. It was for $18,000, paid to a company called Miller Contracting for emergency storm drain and culvert realignment. The check was dated 18 months prior. The sole owner of Miller Contracting? Again, Robert Miller. The address listed for the business? Their home address. I remembered a big storm around that time. But I also remembered that the city's public works department had spent a week in our neighborhood repairing the exact same storm drain system, a project that was widely publicized and paid for by city taxes. Karen and Bob had billed the HOA $18,000 for a repair that the city had done for free. They weren't just bullies. They were common thieves. I meticulously scanned every fraudulent invoice, every check made out to cash, every conflict of interest contract. I cross-referenced them with the HOA's anemic budget reports and public records. I created a spreadsheet, a timeline, and a clear, undeniable trail of embezzlement and fraud, totaling over $60,000 in just 3 years. Karen's little $5,000 lawsuit against me was about to become the most expensive mistake of her life. While I was deep in the financial trenches, my allies were beginning to surface. My next-door neighbor, a quiet retired librarian named Carol, had watched the tow truck incident with wide eyes. She came over the next day with a plate of cookies and a story. "Karen's been like this for years," she whispered, as if Karen could hear us through the walls. "She's strong, armed the last president into resigning, said he was too lenient. No one wants to run against her. We're all too scared of being her next target." I also spoke to the Andersons, the family with the basketball hoop. They'd paid the $200 fine just to make her go away. The Garcias had spent a weekend restaining their deck to the approved color. They were all victims, all intimidated into silence. I didn't show them my evidence yet, that would be premature, but I listened. I took notes. I assured them that things might be about to change. My final preparation was a quiet conversation with Amelia. "I've got it all," I told her, my voice humming with the thrill of the hunt. "Fraud, embezzlement, violations of the Nonprofit Act, you name it." "Dad, this is incredible," she said, after I gave her the summary. "This is far beyond just getting your case dismissed. This is a full-blown counterclaim. We need a new strategy. What do you have in mind?" I asked. "The court ordered a mandatory settlement conference before the trial date," she explained. "It's in 3 weeks. They'll have their strip mall lawyer there. Karen will be there. We go in, we listen to their ridiculous demands, and then we present our findings. Not all of them, just enough. A little preview of what a full discovery process will look like in a real trial." A slow smile spread across my face. "I like it. A little shock and awe." "Exactly," Amelia said. "But Dad, there's one more thing. I need you to trust me on this." "Always," I said. "Okay," she said, her voice dropping a little, taking on a tone of conspiratorial delight. "The judge assigned to mediate the settlement conference for this district. She's a friend of mine, a very good friend. And she owes me a favor. Just play along when we get there. Let me handle the introductions. It's time for Karen to meet the real justice system." The conference was set for a Tuesday morning at the county courthouse. I put on a simple suit and tie, a uniform from my old life that still felt comfortable. I carried a single, slim briefcase. Inside was a neatly organized binder, tabbed and indexed, detailing every single piece of financial dirt I had on Karen and Bob. It was my weapon, and I couldn't wait to use it. Amelia met me on the courthouse steps. She was dressed in a sharp, dark blue suit, looking every bit the formidable legal mind she was. She was no longer just my daughter. She was my counsel, my champion. "Ready?" she asked, a glint in her eye. "Born ready," I replied. We walked into the courthouse, 2 quiet professionals, walking into a battle that our opponent didn't even know had started. Karen thought she was coming to collect a few $1,000s and teach a disobedient homeowner a lesson. She had no idea she was walking into her own judgment day. The settlement conference room was predictably drab. Beige walls, a long polished table, uncomfortable chairs, and the faint smell of stale coffee and desperation. Karen was already there, seated next to a smarmy-looking man in a suit that was a size too tight. This had to be Mr. Finch, her strip mall legal eagle. Karen was radiating an aura of smug triumph. She gave me a tight, condescending smile as Amelia and I took our seats directly across from her. Bob was not present. Presumably, he was busy running his landscaping empire. "Mr. Price," Finch began, his voice oozing false cordiality. "Glad you could make it. I'm sure we can resolve this matter quickly and amicably. My clients are prepared to be reasonable," Karen preened, adjusting the collar of her ridiculously oversized blazer. I simply looked at him, my face a perfect neutral mask, and said nothing. I deferred to my counsel. Amelia placed her briefcase on the table but didn't open it. "And you are?" Finch asked, looking down his nose at her. "Amelia Price. I'm representing my father." Finch's eyebrows shot up. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "A family affair, I see. Cute." He clearly saw her as just some kid, fresh out of law school, doing a favor for her old man. This was working out perfectly. "Let's cut to the chase," Finch continued, leaning forward. "Your father has ignored multiple violation notices. He has refused to pay legitimate fines. Our demands are simple: payment of the full outstanding amount, which now includes additional legal fees for having to prepare for this meeting, totaling $7,500. And of course, the injunction for pre-approval of all future guests." He slid a piece of paper across the table with the new, inflated number. Karen watched me, her expression hungry, waiting for me to balk, to argue, to show weakness. I just glanced at the paper, then looked at Amelia. It was her show. Amelia leaned forward, her hands clasped calmly on the table. "Mr. Finch, before we address your offer, we'd like to wait for the mediator to arrive. I believe in following proper procedure." Just as she finished her sentence, the door opened. A woman in a simple black dress walked in, carrying a leather portfolio. She looked to be in her late 30s, with a no-nonsense air about her and intelligent, perceptive eyes. Karen and her lawyer barely gave her a glance, assuming she was a court clerk. "Good morning," the woman said, her voice clear and authoritative as she took her seat at the head of the table. "I apologize for the delay. I am Judge Evans, and I will be mediating this settlement conference." Finch straightened his tie, his demeanor shifting slightly. Karen, however, still looked bored, as if this was all a formality before her inevitable victory. Judge Evans looked at the file in front of her. "All right, I have the case file here. Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association versus Martin Price, pertaining to alleged covenant violations and unpaid fines. Before we begin, let's go around with introductions for the record. The plaintiff may begin." Finch puffed out his chest. "Edward Finch, representing the plaintiff, Willow Creek Estates HOA, and its president, Ms. Karen Miller," he said, gesturing to Karen. Karen gave the judge a practiced, charming smile. "A pleasure to meet you, Your Honor. I'm just here to protect the integrity of our wonderful community." Judge Evans made a note, her face impassive. She then looked at us. "And for the defense?" My daughter smiled warmly, a genuine, friendly smile that reached her eyes. It was a smile I knew well, but this one was aimed across the table, a missile in disguise. "Good morning, Sarah," she said casually. Judge Evans looked up, and a genuine smile broke across her own face. "Amelia, I didn't realize this was your case when I saw the name. Good to see you. How are your parents?" Karen's smile froze on her face. Her eyes darted from the judge to my daughter, and back again. Finch's jaw went slack. You could practically see the dial-up modem sounds screeching in his brain as he tried to process this new information. "They're great, thanks," Amelia replied cheerfully. "Dad's right here, actually." She gestured to me. "Mom says to say hello." Judge Sarah Evans laughed. "Please tell her I said hello back." "Martin, it's been too long," I smiled politely. "Your Honor, the use of the formal title was deliberate, a subtle underline on the situation for Karen's benefit." The temperature in the room had dropped about 30 degrees. Karen looked like she had just swallowed a block of ice. Her meticulously applied foundation couldn't hide the sudden, stark pallor of her skin. The smugness was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. She was staring at Amelia, then at the judge, then back at Amelia, as if seeing her for the first time. She wasn't seeing the annoying daughter with the illegally parked car anymore. She was seeing a lawyer who was on a first-name basis with the judge, who called her Sarah. Amelia let the silence hang in the air for a moment, enjoying the tableau of shock across the table. Then, she turned her full attention back to business. "Now," she said, her voice crisp and all, "business once more. About your offer, Mr. Finch, we reject it. In fact, we're not here today to discuss a settlement for my father to pay you. We're here to discuss the terms of your client's surrender." She patted her slim briefcase. "You see, my father, Martin Price, spent 30 years as a forensic accountant. It's a bit of a hobby for him, and when you sued him over my one-week visit, you made him curious. He started looking into the HOA's public records. And then, when your clients reluctantly provided their financial statements, He did a little light reading. With a theatrical flourish, she opened the briefcase and pulled out my binder. It landed on the table with a solid, definitive thud that echoed in the silent room. She flipped it open to the first tab, which was labeled Fraudulent Contracts. For example, she said, her voice as cold as a bank vault. Did you know, Mr. Finch, that the HOA's exclusive and very expensive landscaping contractor, Pristine Lawns LLC, is wholly owned by the HOA's treasurer, Robert Miller? A clear conflict of interest and a violation of state nonprofit laws. Karen made a small, choking sound. Finch's face was turning a blotchy red. Amelia flipped to the next tab. Embezzlement. Or perhaps you'd be interested in the $18,000 invoice from Miller Contracting, another company owned by Mr. Miller, for emergency storm drain repair, a repair that was well documented as being completed and paid for by the city. That's not just a conflict of interest, Mr. Finch. That's wire fraud. She continued, flipping tab after tab, her voice calm and steady as she laid out the architecture of their petty corruption. The checks made out to cash. The non-existent elections. The use of HOA funds as a personal slush fund. With each new revelation, Karen seemed to shrink in her chair. The power blazer that had seemed so formidable now looked like a costume on a deflating balloon. Her face, which had been frozen in shock, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. She wasn't just losing a lawsuit. Her entire world was being dismantled, piece by piece, right in front of a judge who happened to be best friends with her opponent's lawyer. When Amelia got to the part about using HOA dues to pay Finch's firm to harass residents, the lawyer actually began sweating. He loosened his tie. His smarmy confidence completely evaporated. He was no longer a predator. He was collateral damage. Finally, Amelia closed the binder. We have a full accounting of over $60,000 in fraudulent and embezzled funds over the last 3 years. We have sworn affidavits from other residents you have harassed, and we are prepared to file a counterclaim against Miss Miller and her husband personally for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and racketeering. We will also be filing a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office, and a copy of this entire file will be sent to the IRS. She paused, letting the full weight of her words settle in the suffocatingly quiet room. So, let's talk about a settlement. Our offer is this. You will drop this frivolous lawsuit against my father immediately, with prejudice. The HOA will issue a formal, written apology to him and to the other families you've targeted. Karen Miller and Robert Miller will resign from the HOA board, effective immediately. They will also personally repay the $60,000 my father has identified, plus his legal fees for having to deal with this mess, which, for the record, are zero since I'm doing this pro bono. But we'll accept a $10,000 donation to the state's legal aid fund in my name as a token of your remorse. She leaned back in her chair. You have 1 hour to accept. Otherwise, we file. And this binder, she patted it lovingly, becomes a public record in a very, very interesting court case. Your call. Karen was motionless, her eyes wide, staring at nothing. She had been so focused on my daughter's car that she never even thought to look at the driver. She had charged headfirst into a legal fortress, and now the portcullis had just slammed shut behind her. She was trapped. The silence that followed Amelia's ultimatum was profound. It wasn't just a lack of noise. It was a heavy, suffocating pressure. Finch, the strip mall lawyer, looked like he'd been tasered. He kept glancing from my binder to Amelia, to the judge, who was watching the entire exchange with an expression of stern, professional interest, the faint trace of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Karen was the center of the implosion. The helmet of blonde hair was still perfect, but the woman beneath it had crumbled. Her face was a mess of conflicting emotions: shock, terror, disbelief, and a profound, bottomless humiliation. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. It was as if her entire vocabulary of threats and bylaws had been wiped clean. Finch finally found his voice, though it was a reedy, panicked squeak. Now, hold on. These are very serious allegations. Amelia raised an eyebrow. They are. And they are all meticulously documented right here. She tapped the binder again. Every invoice, every check, every state filing, it's a turnkey case for any prosecutor. The question for you, Mr. Finch, is whether you want your name attached to it when it becomes public. I imagine being the legal counsel who oversaw and facilitated years of financial fraud isn't great for business. Finch visibly paled. He knew he was caught. He was the enabler, the legal muscle for her petty kingdom, and Amelia had just made it clear that he was going down with the ship. Judge Evans cleared her throat, bringing the focus back to her. Mr. Finch, Miss Miller, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. This is a settlement conference. I am here to mediate a resolution to the case filed, which is HOA v. Price. However, counsel for the defense has introduced information that suggests significant complicating factors. She looked directly at Karen. Ms. Miller, based on what I have just heard, continuing to pursue your original claim seems unwise. In fact, it strikes me as potentially malicious prosecution. The legal term, malicious prosecution, hung in the air. Karen flinched, as if she'd been physically struck. You have been presented with a counter-offer, the judge continued, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. Given the gravity of the potential counterclaims, I would strongly advise you and your client to consider it very carefully. I'm going to take a brief recess to allow you to confer privately. Judge Evans stood up, gave Amelia a brief, almost imperceptible nod, and walked out of the room. The moment the door closed, Finch practically leaped out of his chair and started frantically whispering at Karen, gesturing wildly at the binder. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but the body language was clear. Take the deal, you fool. Karen remained frozen, staring at the polished surface of the table as if it were a crystal ball showing her the wreckage of her future. Amelia and I just sat there, in perfect silence, letting their panic ferment. We didn't need to say a word. The binder on the table was speaking for us. After about 10 minutes of frantic whispering, during which Karen seemed to age a decade, Finch sat back down, looking utterly defeated. The fight was gone. The swagger was gone. He looked like a man who just wanted to be back in his strip mall office, sending meaningless threat letters for $100 a pop. He cleared his throat. My client is willing to accept your terms. Amelia gave a slow, deliberate nod. All of them? She confirmed. Finch swallowed hard. Yes, the lawsuit will be dropped. Apologies will be issued. Ms. Miller and her husband will resign. The reimbursement will be made. The word reimbursement was spoken with such difficulty, as if it were a physical object he was trying to cough up. And the $10,000 donation to legal aid, Amelia added, her voice like steel. Finch winced. Yes, that too. Excellent, Amelia said. She pulled a pre-printed settlement agreement from her briefcase. She had come prepared not just for the battle, but for the surrender ceremony. Sign this. It stipulates everything we've discussed. It's effective immediately. She slid the document and a pen across the table. Finch read it over, his lawyerly instincts forcing him to scan the words, but there was no negotiation left in him. He nudged it in front of Karen. Her hand was trembling as she reached for the pen. Her signature, usually a flamboyant, confident scrawl I had seen on the bottom of my violation notices, was now a spidery, hesitant scratch. She pushed the document back across the table without making eye contact. It was over. We stood up. I picked up my briefcase, the weight of the binder inside feeling much lighter now. A pleasure doing business with you, Amelia said, the irony thick enough to cut with a knife. As we walked to the door, I took one last look at Karen. She was just sitting there, a statue of a defeated tyrant, her perfect hair and expensive blazer, a monument to her own spectacular downfall. The Queen of Willow Creek Estates had been deposed, not by an army, but by an accountant with a grudge and a daughter, with a law degree, and a well-placed friend. The walk out of the courthouse felt like a victory parade for two. The sun was brighter, the air was cleaner. Justice, it turns out, smells a lot like fresh-cut grass, and freedom from petty tyrants. The aftermath was swift and beautiful in its quiet efficiency. 2 days later, a community-wide email went out. It was a stilted, jargon-filled message, announcing the immediate personal and health-related resignations of Karen and Bob Miller from the HOA board. There was no fanfare, just a sudden, stunning power vacuum. A week after that, a letter of apology, written on HOA letterhead but clearly drafted by a chastened Mr. Finch, appeared in my mailbox, as well as in the mailboxes of the Andersons and the Garcias. It was a masterpiece of reluctant contrition. The best part, however, was the check that arrived via courier. A cashier's check made out to the Willow Creek Estates HOA for exactly $60,000, drawn from the Millers' personal account. Amelia made sure a copy of the deposit slip was included in the materials for the emergency board meeting. An interim board was formed, led by none other than my quiet librarian neighbor, Carol. Her first act was to hire a legitimate, third-party accounting firm at my recommendation to conduct a full audit and establish transparent financial practices. Her second act was to schedule the first open board election in over 6 years. The entire Book of Covenants was put up for review. The rule about visitor parking was struck from the records with gleeful unanimity. The basketball hoop was declared a non-issue. The approved list of deck stain colors was ceremoniously shredded at the next community barbecue. Karen and Bob became ghosts in their own neighborhood. The G-Wagon was rarely seen. A for sale sign appeared on their perfect lawn less than a month after the settlement conference. It sold quickly. I heard through the grapevine they moved 2 states away. I have no idea where they went, and I have never expended a single calorie of curiosity to find out. The new HOA is quiet. It's boring. It's exactly what it should be. The monthly fee was actually lowered once Bob's landscaping and contracting companies were no longer on the payroll. The neighborhood feels lighter. People talk to each other more. The Andersons' son plays basketball constantly, and the sound of the ball bouncing on the pavement is now just a happy background noise of a living community. Amelia came to visit again last month. She parked her car in the exact same spot on the street. We sat on the patio, drinking iced tea, and watched the sunset paint the sky. It was peaceful. It was the exact life I had moved here to find. I never set out to be a giant slayer. I just wanted to be left alone. But the thing about bullies like Karen is that they count on their victims being too tired, too intimidated, or too isolated to fight back. They build their little kingdoms on a foundation of fear. But what they never account for is the person who isn't afraid, the person who knows how to read the fine print, who knows how to follow the money. They never expect you to have a daughter who is smarter than them, tougher than them, and who happens to have the presiding judge on speed dial. She didn't sue me because my daughter came to visit. She sued me because she was a bully who picked the wrong target, and in doing so, she gave me and our entire neighborhood the greatest gift of all. She gave us back our peace. So if you take one thing from this story, let it be this: always read the fine print, and it never hurts to have a good lawyer in the family. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because you never know when another Karen might need to be taught a lesson.